Hey there, listener, and welcome back to another episode of That's Debatable. I hope you are doing great this fantastic Monday. This is a little new for me, recording so early in the week, but I thought I'd just get another podcast out to you guys and talk about what's going on in America right now. So I hope everyone is doing great out there. I am wrapping up my final week of my junior year of college, which is pretty crazy to say the least. I'm super excited about being done. It is finals week right now, so I'm a little stressed. I am a little bit kind of going through the thick of it right now, but I'm getting through, and this is going to be hopefully one of my ways of stress relief. So I'm just super excited to be at the end of this season. I hope you guys are enjoying wherever you are in life right now. So though I'm in the thick of it, that's debatable. It's important to me, and I want to keep talking about these issues. So today, I am going to talk about something that is actually a little bit more difficult to talk about. I've kind of been avoiding it for a while because I think it's a challenging topic, and also I am just not an expert on it. I know not many people are, but I am particularly not an expert. So I've kind of been putting it off a little bit, but I'm just going to tackle it this week. It's something that I noticed last week, actually. So last week I wrote a story covering President Joe Biden's joint address to Congress. And in it, he covered a lot of things. He spoke about COVID. He spoke about his American Families Plan. He spoke about what he's done in the last 100 days. He talked about the former president and what he did with his executive orders and the new executive orders he signed. So he talked about a lot of things, but there was something notably missing. President Biden did not really talk about the border. So the border is the southern border of America between America and Mexico has really been an issue for at least my entire lifetime. I can't think of a time that it wasn't in the news, wasn't being talked about in the political sphere, wasn't an issue, wasn't something that someone was campaigning on. So that's been an issue for a long time. I know that this administration has been rather hesitant to actually call it a crisis. They've been more talking about it as an issue or something that needs to be dealt with, but not specifically as a crisis. So I do want to kind of go over some of the things that have been happening. So there has been a few surges at the border. There have been reports. So this one says that inside New Texas immigrant facility already 700% over capacity after 3 weeks, and children are going hungry and sleeping on the floor. And President Biden was preparing to house 3,000 teens at the Dallas Convention Center. So this was reported about a month ago now. Basically, these were all of the updates. So the Migrant Processing Center located at Rio Grande Valley opened on February 24th, was initially approved to accommodate 250 people, and just under a month later, the center already was at 729% capacity amid a surge of crossings. So children being held inside the facility were going hungry, sleeping on the floor, and struggling to gain access to showers. Last month, roughly 100,000 immigrants were caught trying to cross the southern border, which was actually up 30% from January. The Biden administration concedes that a more humane approach to immigration policy has fueled these numbers, but without the proper supplier infrastructure, critics have accused the government of self-created humanitarian crisis that also poses security and health threats to the American people. So that actually about a month ago caused the Biden administration to turn the Dallas Convention Center into temporary housing for migrant children. All of this is to say there is a crisis at the border. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of things happening at the border, people crossing, a lot of uncertainty as far as what the actual new policy is, because President Biden revoked a lot of what President Trump had put into place, but he didn't really put much else in its place. So there's kind of this weird transition period happening right now where no one is really 100% sure what is happening at the border. Everyone just knows something needs to change with regard to the border crisis and the way it is being handled. So, with that being said, I don't think anyone disagrees that the border the pictures or videos or things that come out of the border are pretty horrendous. I don't think anyone thinks that this isn't something that needs to be handled. So I think that that's why it's a good issue for That's Debatable, because no one is on the side of leaving the border just completely unattended, not creating new laws, not figuring out what actually needs to be done there. So that is why I think it's a good topic, and I want to just go ahead and get into it. But right before I kind of delve into the two sides, I want to give a disclaimer similar to the way I approached the gun control issue. It is imperative that we understand that left and right do have differing ideas on how to go about approaching the border crisis, but they both have the best interest of the most amount of people at heart. Where the left may see more humane policies as letting people in, the right just doesn't agree, but that doesn't mean that they don't care about immigrants. No one has a perfect answer to this. No one wants children to suffer. No majority of a party wants to just entirely close the border or entirely open the border. There are rational and reasonable people on both sides of this issue, and there is no perfect answer because it is a really, really tough conversation to have when you're dealing with the repercussions, when you're dealing with the initial causes of it, whatever it may be. This is a really challenging issue, but it's important to understand that just because you may support stricter policy doesn't mean you don't support immigration, doesn't mean you don't understand that immigration is the foundation of this country, doesn't mean you don't support people coming here legally. And just because you think more people should come here legally doesn't mean you want gang members crossing the border illegally and murdering people. So there's so many different sides to this complex issue, and it's important to understand that it's not just one or the other. Like, you can't just have a completely one-sided approach to this, and you can't just believe that the other side has it out for an entire group of people. So starting with that, just to throw that out there at the outset, I want to talk about what each side believes about the issue. So the left in this country tends to believe more strongly in a closer to open border policy than the right does. So they don't entirely believe that we should just entirely open our borders, or at least the majority of the party doesn't believe that, though there may be some fringe people on either side of the issue. The majority of the party does not believe that. In recent years, we have seen a lot of pop-up of sanctuary cities. These are, generally speaking, a city or a county or a state that limits the cooperation with federal immigration enforcement agents to protect low-priority immigrants from deportation while still turning over those who have committed serious crimes. So, essentially, sanctuary cities have popped up along the border. As far as, like, if immigrants can make their way there, there is less likely a chance for them to be deported or to be turned in by the state to the federal agency. So that's kind of one of the bigger problems with the current system, is that federal, or with many federal programs, is that federal programs require the compliance of any state officials or any state police or any state enforcement officers of this. So if the state refuses to comply, or if a city refuses to comply with the state, which refuses to comply with the federal government, then the federal government has nearly no way of enforcing immigration policy. So that's one problem that exists. So we've seen a lot of sanctuary cities that tend to be in more democratic strongholds. The left constantly attacked the previous administration for their handling of the border crisis. That's where we saw a lot of the quote-unquote kids in cages and children separated from their parents at the border. I do want to point out that started under Obama, continued under Trump, and continued under Biden. I don't think anyone is in favor of it. I don't think any single person truly wants kids in cages, and if someone is telling you that, they are being dishonest with you. I just want to throw that out there. But going back to what the left believes. So the desires for the left, I think the main motivations are to increase immigration and to keep families together at the border. So we know that a couple weeks ago now, President Biden tapped Vice President Harris to put her in charge of this crisis. She since said that it is at the top of her priority to visit the southern border. She said she's going to visit, I believe, the Mexican side, not the American side of the border. She has not visited the border yet. That has been a cause of much tension. Kind of beside the point, but just an interesting fact. And she's talked about a lot about how, which I believe is reflective of the left's policy, at least with Biden at the head of the party, is getting aid to foreign nations. So what do they plan to do exactly? Can foreign aid to Central America actually stop the migrant surge? This is by Sarah Westwood, written for the Washington Examiner about a week ago, actually wrote on this very topic. And she said that Vice President Harris's virtual meeting with the president of Guatemala on Monday will represent her highest profile move to date concerning the Biden administration's plan to combat soaring migration levels with increased aid to Central America. But aid has consistently flowed to the Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and has, in the past, failed to stop surges in the number of people heading north to cross the United States. Harris said Thursday that more aid to the Northern Triangle could help people decide against making the journey to the U.S., arguing most people don't want to leave their homes. Quote, "We have to give people a sense of hope that help is on the way, a sense of hope that if they stay, things will get better," she said. The U.S. has sent billions of dollars to the Northern Triangle over the years, but poverty, violence, and corruption have continued to ravage the countries, and the aid has not stopped Central Americans from crossing the border. President Joe Biden pledged $861 million to Central America in his 2022 budget proposal, although it is unclear whether that request includes just the Northern Triangle or will be spread out across all countries in the region. With less aid so former President Trump did decrease the aid, and migration levels were still lower than the historic ones that Biden is overseeing. For example, in 2017, the U.S. gave roughly $560 million in aid to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and roughly 304,000 people were apprehended that year. The next year, they gave $462 million, so that's even less money, and they apprehended roughly 397,000. So although in 2019, with a growing migrant surge, Trump followed through on a threat to cut the aid, until the leaders did more to stop people from fleeing north, the Democrats did not approve of that. So, Westwood continues, she says that Border Patrol agents are on track to encounter far more people this year than during individual years under Trump, despite the Biden administration continuing to pour aid into Central America. CBP reported encountering almost 173,000 people on the border in the month of March alone. Between January and March, they encountered more people than it did the entire year in 2017. So, the bottom line is, this is a problem, and there is a crisis at the border, and one way that they plan to deal with the issue is to provide aid to the Central American countries to prevent people from coming over to America. And here is actually Vice President Harris speaking on the issue.
Well, okay, look, it's a huge problem. Yeah. I'm not going to pretend it's not. It's a huge problem. And are we looking at overcrowding at the border, in particular of these kids? Yes. Yeah. Should these kids be in the custody of HHS, the Health and Human Services, instead of the Border Patrol? Yes. Should we be processing these cases faster? Yes. This is, however, not going to be solved overnight. There are things that we need to do, especially since there was a system in place previously, before the last administration, to allow us to process these kids in their country of origin. That was dismantled. We have to reconstruct it. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have senior administration officials right now in Mexico and Guatemala also dealing with, in addition to what needs to happen at the border.
Will you and the president be going down to the border anytime soon?
At some point, absolutely, we will go down to the border, and I've been down to the border. And our Secretary of the Homeland Security, Alex Mayorkas, has been down there twice. Senior administration officials have been down there. And yes, we will go. But the reality also is that in addition to the border, we also need to deal with the root causes. Yes. We need to deal with what's happening in the Northern Triangle and address it in a way that is about not only diplomacy, but bringing our allies together, dealing with what we need to do around around aid in a way that is about developing those countries so that we also deal with the cause of why people are coming into our country.
That's a long.
So that was Vice President Harris on the issue, kind of stating in her own words what I said, that her plan is to really address why people are coming into the country and to encourage them to stay in their home countries and to provide enough resources that they are able to safely, and they are encouraged to do so. So the important issues of the administration are focusing really what is happening in the other countries more than what is happening here. Biden has also spoken out on the issue. President Biden has said that President Biden has kind of spoken out saying that he is on the same side as Vice President Harris and whatever she wants to do. He blamed President Trump for a lot of the problems that are currently going on at the border. Here is what he had to say in a one-on-one on the Today exclusive Today interview.
This was not one of the crises that demanded urgent action in January. Does it demand urgent action now? Is what's happening at the southern border, is it a crisis?
It is getting urgent action now. For example, a month ago, we had thousands of young kids in custody in places they shouldn't be and controlled by the Border Patrol. We have now cut that down dramatically. Here's what happened, Craig. The failure to have a real transition, the two departments that didn't give us access to virtually anything were the Immigration and the Defense Department. So we didn't find out they had fired a whole lot of people, that they were understaffed considerably.
But in April alone, Mr. President, 170,000 people, migrants, apprehended at the border. It's a 20-year record. There are 22,000 unaccompanied children in our country right now. That's a record. That sounds to most folks like a crisis.
Well, look, it's way down now. We've now gotten control.
So that's one video of President Biden on the issue. He has spoken out about it multiple different times. So there is more on the issue. So he also did an interview with George Stephanopoulos for ABC, in which he laid out in which he was pressed on whether or not this is actually a crisis at the border. Here is a little bit of what that sounded like.
At the border, some heartbreaking scenes down there right now. And a lot of the migrants coming in saying they're coming in because you promised to make things better. It seems to be getting worse by the day. Was it a mistake not to anticipate this surge?
Well, first of all, there was a surge the last 2 years, in 19 and 20, there was a surge as well.
This one might be worse.
No, well, it could be, but here's the deal. We're sending back people to, first of all, the idea that Joe Biden said come, because I heard the other day that they're coming because they know I'm a nice guy and I won't do what Trump did.
They're saying this.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. They're not. The adults are being sent back, number one. That's number one. Now, number two, what do you do with an unaccompanied child that comes to the border? Do you repeat what Trump did? Take them from their mothers, move them away, hold them in cells, etc.? We're not doing that. So what we're doing is we have brought in HHS and also brought in FEMA to provide for enough safe facilities for them to get out of the control of the Border Patrol, which are not designed to hold people for long periods of time, particularly.
So what President Biden goes on to say in that interview is, in this interview with George Stephanopoulos, he says his message to migrants is, quote, don't come over. So amid the surge of immigrants and unaccompanied minors to the U.S. southern border, Stephanopoulos asked the president, do you have to say quite clearly, don't come? And President Biden responded, yes, I can say quite clearly, don't come over. Don't leave your town or city or community, he added. The number of unaccompanied teens and children who have been taken into U.S. custody along this border has shot up in recent weeks. So what President Biden said in that interview is that Customs and Border Patrol is not really equipped to handle this situation. They're not the ones that should be handling it. They're not the ones that should be housing these children. And that's why he wants to bring up other departments from the federal agencies to talk about to handle the children better than Customs and Border Patrol would be able to handle it because they are not the best ones suited for this issue. So that kind of in general provides an understanding of what the Biden administration is doing towards this issue. Democrats tend to focus on a pathway to citizenship, and they tend to want to allow more immigrants into the country and to provide them a way to gaining that citizenship, that is so American citizenship that is so coveted. They harken back a lot to the fact that we are a nation of immigrants, so we should not be denying new people those same opportunities that so many others before them have received. This is how we got programs like under the Obama administration, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, because we did not want to punish children who were brought here not of their own accord. A lot of the problems with the Democratic Party's opinions on immigration are that there are not a lot of clear cut stances, policies, and kind of what the general policies are going to be towards the border. So when tracking the 2020 election, NPR actually put out kind of a questionnaire to all of the Democratic members and as to where they all stood on these issues. So they were split on every single one of these issues. I will tell you where President Biden falls, but for the most part, they're split on all of these issues. So one, on the issue of decriminalizing illegal border crossings, about half of the Democrats running in 2020 said yes, about the other half said no. Biden was among those that does not want to decriminalize illegal border crossings, meaning he does think it should be a crime to cross the border illegally. Whether or not we should increase, decrease, or roughly maintain current immigration levels, they were almost identically split on we should increase it or they had not given a clear position. President Biden was for increasing current immigration levels. Another question was increase, decrease, or maintain the amount spent on Customs and Border Patrol. This is about the one issue that not a single candidate actually stood firm on, except for Senator Bernie Sanders, saying that he wanted to decrease the funding, and almost every other candidate said that they were unclear on the issue. Whether or not we should change the makeup of current legal immigration, again, whether or not we should change it, most Democratic nominees remained unclear. President Biden was unclear on the issue. So when it comes to those big issues, whether or not we should change how we do legal immigration, whether or not we should fund Border Patrol or defund them, whether or not we should increase or decrease immigration, and whether or not we should decriminalize immigration, President Biden didn't take a strong stand on any one of the issues, and none of the leaders of the Democratic Party have a clear mandate from the Democratic Party, from the constituents, as to what they actually want done with regards to the border. They just know they want the more humane version of all these issues. So typically there's relative lack of clarity about the policies that they want to go into place, but the Democratic Party does support DACA. They do support letting people in the country, and they support keeping families together. All noble things to pursue. So that's kind of where the Democratic Party resides. Again, Vice President Harris is in charge of the issue. We'll see what she does in the coming months with regard to the issue. It looks like she's going to try funding those Central American countries to kind of try to prevent people from leaving, but also bettering their situations. But in general, there is a little bit of a lack of clarity coming from the Democratic Party as to what their actual policy positions are that stem from what they actually believe about immigration, because we know that they are the party of pro-immigration. We know that they want things like sanctuary cities, but as far as how to control that immigration at the border, there is a little lack of clarity. Moving on to the other side of the aisle, Republicans, as I mentioned before, I want to reiterate, just because they want stricter control on the border does not mean they don't care about immigrants, does not mean that they are, they think immigrants are not important to the nation, does not mean anything other than the fact that they think that the issue is just more complex than the Democratic Party tends to. So something former President Trump talked a lot about were MS-13 gang members and coyotes, which are gangs or criminals who smuggle people across the border, smuggle children across the border, smuggle drugs across the border, and come into our border illegally and then kind of disappear and are never apprehended by border control. that thought process, the fear of people crossing illegally and being bad people in general, is something that leads the Republicans to want significantly stricter border policy. That is not that they necessarily want significantly fewer people coming in. It is that we want fewer people, or they want fewer people coming in illegally. The less people are able to come in legally, and so the problem that Republicans have with illegal immigration is that the more people that come in illegally, the less people that are allowed to come in legally, because they kind of muck up the process. They make things harder. That we have to deal with a lot more deportations. So it's basically the few ruining it for the many. And that is why Republicans believe that stricter control of the border would lead to more legal immigration and significantly less illegal immigration. It's not that they don't want immigrants, it's that they want less illegal immigrants. So, again, the whole idea of keeping kids in these migrant facilities, keeping them in cages, keeping them in camps, whatever terminology you want to use, no single party is in favor of that. No single party has ever been in favor of that. President Trump did it. It was horrible. President Obama did it. It was horrible. President Biden is still doing it, and it is still a horrible thing to see. Everyone is disgusted. Everyone is terrified, and everyone is worried sick for these children. It's just that we have different ways to go about solving the problem. So, one thing that was big during the Trump presidency were the agreements that Donald Trump had with a lot of the Central American nations. So this was called the DHS agreements with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, the three previously mentioned nations. And this was, I'm just going to read you actually straight from the DHS fact sheet, as they call it. So it says, there is an ongoing humanitarian and security crisis at the southwest border due to historic levels of irregular migration and human smuggling. Over 72% of all migrants apprehended at the southwest border through August of fiscal year 2019 were from the countries of the northern region of Central America, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. In recognizing the push and pull factors which cause irregular migration to the U.S., DHS has entered into agreements and arrangements with each of these countries to further expand asylum capabilities and improve safety, security, and prosperity throughout the region. With these agreements and arrangements, the U.S. is committed to being a good partner to its Central American neighbors and will work to develop an economically vibrant region. Together, DHS and its partners are developing a safer and more prosperous region so that Central Americans can feel confident in creating futures in their home countries rather than putting their lives in the hands of smugglers and criminal organizations to make the dangerous journey across the U.S. border. These agreements will allow migrants to seek protection within the region by facilitating cooperation between the U.S. and host nation governments or international organizations to expand their systems for offering humanitarian protections. So, this was, of course, almost immediately undone by the Biden administration. This was a process by which people would remain in their host countries while applying for asylum, while America decided whether or not they would be granting them asylum, and this was because a lot of people would apply for asylum at the border, and then it would take a long time to process the work. They would be allowed into America. They would be given a court date, or they would be given a time at which their case would be heard, and they would never show up again because they would just disappear into the interior of the United States. This kind of stopped that from happening by allowing people to wait in the home countries while America processed that asylum, while also kind of employing the same tactics that Vice President Harris wants to employ in actually creating a better environment at home. That way people are less inclined to come to America. So that is a rather interesting move by President Trump. Of course, President Biden moved to end that Trump era, quote, asylum agreement with the countries. The State Department announced on Saturday that it had suspended the so-called asylum cooperative agreements with immediate effect and initiated the process to terminate them. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said in a statement that the administration has notified El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras that the United States is, quote, taking this action as efforts to establish a cooperative, mutually respectful approach to managing migration across the region begin. So that's kind of interesting to read about, to read what President Trump signed into office, and then President Biden, who seemingly is taking a similar approach, actually did away with what President Trump said even though that policy was also extremely popular among conservatives. Trump even signed a policy to keep families together, which was well underreported. The problem with the policy is that it also kept them detained together. So President Trump, this is according to The Guardian. President Trump signed an executive order to, quote, keep families together amid extraordinary public condemnation over his practice of separating children from parents at the southern border. Quote, I consider it to be a very important executive order, Trump said during the signing ceremony in the Oval Office. Quote, it's about keeping families together while at the same time being sure that we have a very powerful, very strong border, and border security will be equal, if not greater, than previously. I didn't like the sight or feeling of families being separated. The text of the executive order makes clear that a hardline approach to immigration enforcement will continue. Essentially, the order instructed government officials to continue a zero-tolerance enforcement policy of criminal prosecution for every immigrant who crosses the border illegally, but says that officials will seek to maintain family unity by detaining parents and children together. So, the reason that parents and children are separated at the border is because when parents cross the border with their children, they cross the border illegally. When you cross the border illegally, you have become a criminal. You have committed a crime in the United States of America by crossing our border when you were not legally allowed to do so. Children, however, under more humane ideas, should not have to be detained for the crimes of their parents. Therefore, parents and children are separated at the border because parents have committed a crime and children have not. This, of course, separates the family from itself. So the question is it better to take both the parent and the child to be detained together because the parent committed a crime, so they're going to need to be detained one way or another? Does that mean the child should go with them? Or is it more humane to not detain the child because they haven't done anything? That question is pretty morally ambiguous. There's not a lot to be said on one way or the other. It's kind of a hard question to wrestle with. You can decide what you believe on it, but that's the issue. That is why children are separated from their parents at the border. It is not simply because we want to separate families. It is because parents have committed a crime, and because of that crime, they are being detained. This is the same thing that happens if an adult were to commit a crime in America, and they would be taken to jail. They would be separated from their child because they have committed a crime, and that is how detaining a criminal works. So, Trump did sign a policy to keep them together. The only thing it did was also detain them all together. That is how they were kept together. Conservatives favored this. Democrats tended not to like it. That's the issue. Republicans also tend to want to support Border Patrol as they see problems with a crime rate. They really don't think that a single criminal committing a crime is a low enough statistic to disregard. So essentially what I'm trying to say there is that even if one illegal immigrant commits a crime, that is one illegal immigrant too many, and we should not be allowing any criminals in our borders. And that means that we should protect the southern border even more. This leads to them taking policy positions such as wanting to build the wall in the southern border. It's not that we want to just keep everyone out. It's not that Americans are extremely nationalist. It's that Republicans believe that there is a system and it's important to follow that system so that everyone can benefit from that system. Because if you have people coming here illegally, you have less people coming here legally, and that is not what anyone wants. Republicans tend to criticize Democrats for the fact that they continue to incentivize people to come, even though they tell them to their face not to. So kind of like what happened with President Biden. He encouraged people to come to the border while at the same time his policy incentivizes it, while at the same time his words tell them not to come, which kind of leads to a confusing message. So the issue is extremely difficult. It's extremely convoluted. Just the other day on Fox News, while Dana Perino was actually hosting an interview with a farmer in Texas, Border Patrol literally crossed his lawn searching for trying to track down an illegal immigrant. So it is not easy. There is a crisis at our southern border, and it needs to be dealt with, and it is a hard issue. And everyone understands that at the root, this entire nation is built on immigrants. Everyone understands that we cannot just permanently close our borders. Everyone understands that there is a lot to be dealt with this issue, and that it's a complex one, and everyone wants to handle it with as much compassion and humanity as we possibly can. And it's just not fair to demonize the other side as simply wanting to keep children in borders or as simply wanting to open borders all the way, because the issue is so much deeper than that. It is highly controversial, highly debatable, as I always say. But that doesn't mean that it is a conversation that doesn't need to be had. That doesn't mean that it is something that we should avoid talking about, even though it's a hard one. We just need to understand that there's a way to approach these things with a humanity and a compassion that we should all have for one another. So there's that. That's what both sides believe about the issue. That is the information that I have for you today. So regarding just a quick little note on the Bible and what the Bible says about this. I don't want to read anything that we constantly talk about or that the Bible constantly mentions about one thing or another about the way that we should treat people from other lands. I know we could talk about the Good Samaritan. I know we could talk about the way Jews were treated. I know there are just a plethora of different things that we could talk about, but I really want to go to something even more simple than that. And I want to talk about how many times the Bible says to love your neighbor. I'm just going to read off a bunch of different verses. Leviticus 19:18 says, "You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." Matthew 19:19, "Honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Matthew 22:39, "The second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Mark 12:31, "The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Luke 10:27, "And he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Romans 13:9, "For this you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Galatians 5:14, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word in this statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." James 2:8, "If, however, you are fulfilling the royal law according to Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well." Romans 13:8, "Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law." Matthew 5:43, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." Matthew 5:44, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Luke 6:27, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you." Luke 6:35, "But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be the sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men." Matthew 5:46, "For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even tax collectors do the same?" Luke 6:32, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them." Deuteronomy 10:19, "So show your love for the alien, for you who were aliens of the land of Egypt." Leviticus 19:34, "The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." And Mark 12:33, "And to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and all the strength, and to love one's own neighbor as himself, is much more than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices." That was 18 Bible verses regarding loving your neighbor. I'm going to go a little more into depth just about Matthew because I personally love Matthew. I think it's my favorite gospel. And I'm going to read from Matthew 22 because I think this part is super interesting. It says 22:33, "And when the multitudes heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, and saying, 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?' Jesus said to him, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets.' While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, 'What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?' They said to him, 'The son of David.' He said to them, 'How then does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool? If David then calls him Lord, and how is he his son?' And no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day on did anyone dare question him anymore. What I love so much about that is it really shows, first of all, it shows the character of Christ. It shows a lot about how Christ handled these really difficult situations where people were always questioning him and always questioning his authority and what he was saying. And something that I've always found interesting about this passage is that it says that the lawyer asked him the question to test him. And you can think about how a lawyer would go about asking that question, even trying to kind of have a gotcha moment as they would maybe to a witness on a witness stand, or in an accusatory way, or in a very attacking way. And it's interesting because I find that I think in those same terms. I tend to think in more accusatory or gotcha questions, and trying to understand things in a way that makes me able to poke holes in arguments or better understand things. And I think I can understand where this Pharisee is coming from, trying to say, oh, he won't know the great law. And Jesus just has this simple response that all he's asking of you is to love your God and to love your neighbor. And that neighbor that is also God's child, why wouldn't you love them? And it's just such a simple answer. And when they think that they're going to get Jesus on this simple question, he not only gives them an answer they probably didn't want to hear, he gives them the answer to all of life, to all of how we should all be acting towards one another. And I think that can be, I think what's interesting after that is how Christ goes after them back and just kind of says, and you're talking about David, and David, the Christ is the son of David, but he is also David's Lord. How does that work? And they can't explain it, and it's because it's not meant to be explained, and it's not meant to be maybe understood even by people like us. So I think what I really want to focus out on here is, first of all, I understand where the lawyer is coming from, and I feel like I can understand wanting to try to understand what Jesus is saying to them. And also, it is really such a simple commandment that we gloss over and take for granted. And I think this has to do both with how we deal with each other and how we deal with the immigration crisis. And I think we need to start learning to look at one another with this love and look at one another with this respect on every side of the issue, on every side of every issue, on every side of the aisle, on every side of whatever issue you may be on. There is someone on the other side equally as passionate, equally as informed, and equally as dedicated to the issue. And if you just treat them with the love that God would, and if you just understand and remember that they are a child of God, the world would be such a better place. And then even more to that point, if we could just remember that these immigrants coming from other nations are people that seek asylum, seek freedom, seek religious freedom, seek freedom from religious persecution, seek asylum from economic persecution, whatever it may be, they just want that same opportunity that we have. And who are we to say no and to not show them that love that Jesus is telling us that we are supposed to show people? So I think in this instance, it is really, really important that we always remember that we are to be showing the love of God to everyone, to each other, to people trying to come into our nation, to whoever may be needing of that love. It's our job to be the ones to show it. So as you reflect on what you think about the border crisis, and as you reflect on the many different issues, remember that you have to love your neighbor. That is your Democrat neighbor, your Republican neighbor, your socialist neighbor, your independent neighbor, your religious neighbor, your atheist neighbor, your Asian American neighbor, your African American neighbor, whoever it is, you have to love your neighbor. And that includes people simply trying to come into this country to better their lives. So I'll leave you with that. Jesus said, the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that is the wholehearted word of the Lord right there. That is what I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, keep your prayers big and your worries small. And thanks for joining me on That's Debatable.